This video will cover everything you need to know about Cursor, specifically the new version, Cursor 3.0. I'm going to assume no prior knowledge and do this completely for beginners. That means I'm going to go over every core feature, show you how to set up Cursor, how to create a new project, how to write code or use AI to generate it, and then I'm going to get into all of the advanced features like Subagents, Sidechats, working in the cloud, MCP servers, all of the important concepts that you need to make this a legitimate development environment. Now, I've been using Cursor ever since it came out. They've actually been a long-term partner of mine and loaded me up with tens of thousands of dollars in Cursor credits, and I'm glad to say that they sponsored this video, so the curriculum you see here is officially approved by them. That said, you can use Cursor for free. You don't need to pay for anything. And with that said, let's get into the video and do a full Cursor 3.0 course. So let's start by quickly covering what Cursor is and how this differs from tools like Claude Code or Codex. Now, Cursor is a full integrated development environment. It's actually a fork of Visual Studio Code, so it's going to look very similar to that if you've ever used it before, and it essentially has a ton of AI features. This means that you can use this as an AI IDE or AI integrated development environment where you can view the code, you can edit the code, you can add tools, you can see everything that's going on, and at the same time fully utilize all of the AI features that you would use inside of something like Claude Code or Codex. The main difference I like to point out here is that when you're using a CLI-based tool or something like Codex or Claude Code, you're typically not actually viewing the files, you're not reading through any of the code, you don't really know everything that's going on, and you're kind of just blindly trusting the AI model. With Cursor, you get a lot more control, so sure, you can still do that, you can vibe code all you want, but you also have all of the powerful development tools that real engineers would use when they're actually shipping applications. So people that are serious software engineers would lean towards using something like Cursor as opposed to a Claude Code or a Codex where you have a lot more control in this type of tool. Okay, so in order to get started with Cursor, the first thing that we need to do is download it. Like I mentioned, it is free, but of course, when you're using AI models, if you use them a lot, you will need to upgrade and purchase a plan. So I'm going to go over all the pricing so you understand everything, but the first step is to download it. I'm going to leave a link to it in the description. Now, Cursor has recently come out with a bunch of new features, which means you can use this from your phone. You can use this directly in the web if you don't have even like a decent computer, but for most of us, we're going to want the desktop application. So I'll leave a link to it in the description. I've already got the Windows version, but you can download it for Mac or for Linux on pretty much any machine that you have. Okay, so download Cursor. Now, once you download Cursor, it should prompt you to create or sign into an account. You can also do that directly from the Cursor webpage. So if you don't already have one, sign in or create a new account here with Cursor, and then you can quickly have a look at the pricing. Now, if you've never used this before, definitely just stick with the free plan. And as you start using it, if you like it, you can upgrade to the Pro, Pro Plus, or Ultra plan, or go up to Teams or Enterprise, depending on what you're doing. Now, the pricing works really similarly to any tools you may have used before, where you have a certain amount of usage across different models. You have a lot more usage on Cursor's models themselves, which are Grok and Composer, which we'll go over in a minute, and then less on the frontier models like Fable, for example, or GPT 5.6, but you can always pay for additional usage if you want to. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to assume that you've downloaded and installed the desktop application and that you've signed into your account or created a new one if you didn't already have one. Once you do that, you should be brought to a page that looks something, let me go here, like this. This is kind of the default view that Cursor should bring you inside of. Now, if it looks a little bit different, don't worry, because they're constantly updating the user interface, but you should see this kind of blank agent window that looks something like this. Okay, now I'm going to go through the entire user interface so it will make complete sense and you'll know where to go, what buttons to press. But first, I want to quickly discuss some of the major changes that have come in Cursor 3.0 because some of you may have used previous versions of the tool or seen my other tutorials on it. Now, currently, Cursor is on version 3.0. They keep making minor changes, so when you watch this video, it might be slightly different, but there was some major changes that were made as opposed to Cursor 1.0 or 2.0. Now, we have kind of three waves of changes that I want to quickly go through. Now, the first wave happened about 6 months ago, where effectively what Cursor did is start added skills, subagents, lots of plugins. They have their own Cursor marketplace, and they added modes like debug mode and design mode, as well as sidechats, which are super cool, which we'll look at in a second. Then in about April of this year, so 2026 when I'm filming this video, they switched to an agent-first interface. This completely changed the look of Cursor, so you no longer had the default IDE view, which you can still go back to, and it showed you a bunch of agents, and the idea was to be running multiple agents at the same time in parallel and using their cloud. And then recently, they added a bunch of other features in the past 2-3 months here, like new models, Composer 2.5, which is really good. automations, Bugbot, Cloud Subagents, the iOS application, and then of course very recently they added the Grok 4.5 model. You can see July 16th was this post, literally yesterday from when I'm recording this video, and this is in partnership with SpaceX. So you may have heard Grok before on Twitter, X, whatever. Well, they actually trained the model using compute directly from SpaceX, and Grok 4.5 is now extremely good, and you can see quickly how it kind of lines up in the benchmarks at a much cheaper price per token than you would pay for comparable models like Fable, for example, or GPT 5.5 on X high mode. Anyways, point is that they have a bunch of cool features. Let's go through them and let me show you them directly in the user interface. Okay. So when you open up the user interface, you're going to be brought to a page that looks like this. Now, I promise I'm going to show you actually writing code, but it's really important that you understand where you're working and how to move around in here because there are a lot of features. So the view that should open by default is the agent view. This is where you're just going to see a prompt window similar to something like ChatGPT, right? And from here, you have a bunch of different options. So first, you have the model selector, right? You can see that you can change the model. There's a ton of models here, and if you have no idea what to use, you can flick it into this auto mode. This is typically going to prefer using Cursor's model, so the Composer 2.5 model and Grok 4.5. But you also can switch between pretty much any other model that you want. But keep in mind, if you're using models like Fable 5 or ones that don't come directly from Cursor, it's going to eat up your usage faster. So for example, if I switch to Fable 5, well, I can use this, but it's just going to go through the usage quicker than if I were to use their standard models. Okay, so this is kind of the first view, right? And you'll notice that there's a button in the top right-hand corner called IDE. It might move when you're watching this video, but if you click this, it's going to switch you into more of the development mode where you're going to be able to see what looks like a much more traditional editor. This is the IDE view. This is the Agents tab view. The Agents tab view is mostly meant for people that are not technical, where you're just going to be prompting and getting some kind of output. You can still view the code and see what's going on, but you'll be able to view multiple agents at the same time running here. You can see it showing me all my different repositories that I had, and the idea is to use this more for multitasking when you have multiple different agents running at the same time. You also can expand all of the windows here. So on the right-hand side, you can see changes that have been made. You can see a browser, okay? On the left-hand side, if you move this, you can expand this kind of agent view where you can search through stuff, automations, settings, right? There's a lot of stuff. I'm going to go through it one by one, but I'm just trying to give you a lay of the land. So again, important thing, agent view, kind of de facto view, especially if you're not technical, you're going to prefer using this. And then the IDE view here where you'll actually be able to view all of the code and use traditional IDE features, which I will show you in a minute. So for right now, before we go into the IDE view, I would prefer for us to stay in the agent view because this is going to be simpler for most of you watching this. And we're going to start running a few prompts, setting up a project, and just getting kind of the base ready to go before we move into anything too complex. All right, so we're in the agent view. I'm just going to make this full screen, and we're going to start creating a fresh project. So let's say you're brand new, you're coming into Cursor, you've signed into your account from down here, right? And now you want to actually start working on a project. Well, the first thing you should do is change the folder that you're working in. So you're going to notice there's kind of a little button right here that says the folder that you're working in. Now it's confusing because I have a folder called Google Gemini Pro, but this is the folder or the directory that you're going to work in. So what we want to do here is we want to scroll all the way down and we want to press on new folder. Okay, so if you're starting completely from scratch, you press new folder. From new folder, we're just going to make a folder to work in. So I suggest going to your desktop, making a new folder. I'm just going to call this Cursor demo or something, and then just select this folder, okay, and create it. All right, so I got it open here. It was just bugging a little bit, but you can see I've selected this folder. Now you also notice there's a bunch of other stuff popping up. You'll see cloud, PC, no repo, use existing, whatever. Don't worry too much about that. The two you're probably going to go with is use existing, which means you're going to connect to a folder that already exists, or you're just going to make a new one. All right, so this is our first project, and now what we wanted to start doing is prompting. Now, before we prompt, we want to understand how to do that the most efficiently, and what a good prompt is. So if you're coming to Cursor, the idea is that you want to build something, right? We want to build some type of coding related project. So we first need to understand what it is that we want to build, and this is really up to you. Now for this demo, I'm just going to build a game in the browser because I find that's the most visual and easiest to demonstrate to you, but you can build pretty much anything that you want. However, when you are building, there's a lot of decisions that you need to make up front, which I'm going to help you do. So what we want to start doing right away is, first of all, put this into plan mode. Now, there's a bunch of different modes, but whenever you're starting out, I recommend that you put this in the plan mode. We'll look at the other modes in a minute. And for the model, I suggest that you go with Cursor Grok 4.5. Okay, we're going to talk about model selection and modes and all of that in a minute, but for now I just want to get us started. Now, what I want to do is I actually just want to begin by kind of dumping my thought process on what it is that I want to build into Cursor. Now, in order to do that, I recommend that you use a voice dictation or a voice-to-text tool. So on my computer, you'll see that I'm using something called Wispr Flow. Let me quickly demo to you. Hey, I'm just coming up with a plan. Can you help me come up with a plan for the Super Mario Bros. Game that I want to create? Whatever, I'm just doing some random stuff, and you can see that I immediately get all of my voice, translate it into text with all of the proper punctuation, spelling, all of that, and it will even format things and give you bullet points. Now, I'm using a tool called Wispr Flow. I'm just going to quickly open it for you guys so you can see what it looks like here. It's free. You can download it on Mac, Windows, and it allows you just to directly talk into your computer. Now, Wispr Flow has been a long-term partner of the channel. They've also kindly sponsored this video, and they work natively inside of Cursor. What that means is that it can actually tag files with the Cursor tool so that the dictation or the voice-to-text that you get is better. The reason I recommend using this, and again, you don't need to pay for the pro version like I am, is because you can speak much faster than you can type. And when you speak, you typically give much deeper, richer prompts that are going to give more context to the model so it can give you a better output. So what I like to do, right, once I've got this downloaded, is I like to start by just dumping my full thought process into the model and telling it, hey, this is what I want to make, this is why I want to make it, and this is who it's designed for. If you can answer those 3 questions at the beginning, you'll kind of be off to a good start and you'll see what I mean. So in our case, I want to make a platformer game. So what I'm going to say is, hey, I'm making a YouTube video right now. I want to do a demo to showcase Cursor's capabilities, and I would like to create a platformer game, something like Super Mario Bros. I want it to be a little unique. We don't need to go with the same color palette or the exact same kind of design as Super Mario. I don't know exactly what I want, but I know that I want a platformer. I want to be able to move. I want to have some animations, and I want this to work in the browser so that I could share it with other people and that they could use it just by going to a simple URL. I don't want anything too complex. I want to focus mostly on the visuals, the gameplay, and making a fun game in the browser. Boom. Okay, this is what I'm doing. And then last thing, because I kind of forgot, I'm going to say I would like pretty much anybody to be able to play this, let's say between ages 10 and 60. Should be pretty user-friendly and use standard keyboard commands that most people are familiar with. So you can see I'm adding a lot of detail, I'm explaining what I want, and then the last part of the prompt that I always recommend that you put, especially when you're just starting to build this out, is the following. Please ask me any clarifying questions or any design decisions that you need answered before we proceed with the build. So what I'm doing is I'm prompting the model and say, hey, ask me any questions because I know I might not have given you all of the details that you need. And then you'll see when I press enter here in Cursor that actually now has a feature where it can directly prompt you with questions in the user interface. So hopefully in a second, it will kind of pop those up for us and allow us just to directly press the answers. Okay, so you can see that it's asked us some questions. Sometimes it will actually give you like a pop-up and you can just press the buttons directly, but in this case, we're just gonna type them in. So it's asking us, hey, what visual do we want? I kind of wanna go with like this forest one, so I'm just going to paste that as option 1. And then for the demo scope, I want to go with maybe B, slightly richer, so we have double jump, power-ups, and a bunch of stuff. Also useful if you already know. Controls, art style, let's go with keep the controls, arrow keys, or WASD. Okay, and then for the art style, I'm going to go, let's go with kind of chunky pixel art. For sharing, we'll deploy it later, but don't worry about that for right now. Okay, so I'm answering all of the questions. I'm going to press enter, and ideally what's going to happen now, because we're in this plan mode, is that Cursor is going to start creating a detailed plan for us. We can review the plan, and then only once we're happy with that, we can start executing it and building this out. Now, I promise I'm going to go into a lot more features, but I'm trying to keep this really beginner friendly. Again, the setup is make a new folder, select the model, put it in plan mode, use Wispr Flow or your voice to give a really detailed starting prompt, ask the model to ask you clarifying questions as we did here, answer them, and then review the plan that it comes up with. And then once we've got this plan and we're happy with it, we can move on to start building, which is the phase that we're at now. Okay, so you can see very quickly, it's come up with the plan here. I want to quickly review and see what it does. Now notice this plan is actually created using something called a markdown file. A markdown file is a file that ends in .md, and this is a very common format, kind of similar to like a text file or a code file that's used when working with AI agents. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that to you is that the formatting you see here is in what's called a markdown format, and recently they actually added the ability to have, visual charts and stuff in markdown and render directly in Cursor. So we can see that we can also move this around if we wanted to make it a little bit larger. We can make it full screen if it's kind of hard for us to see. And then we can open and close it on the right-hand side and view all of the stuff like the forest platformer demo here, which will then trigger the plan. Okay, so decisions, we've made that. The tech approach, it's going to do this in HTML5, okay? The gameplay loop is going to look like this. Of course, if I was building a real app, I would review this a little bit more carefully, but now what we want to do is proceed to build. Now, when we're building, it's going to directly give us an option to either build in parallel or to build locally. We can also build in the cloud. Now, I'm going to stay away from the cloud right now because I don't want to confuse you. We'll look at that later. For now, I suggest you build everything locally on your own computer. Okay, so to build locally, we can literally just press this button, and then there is this build in parallel mode. If you do that, what will happen is Cursor will actually create multiple agents for you that will start tackling the plan in parallel so that ideally it can get done faster. There's no reason not to use this, so I'm just going to use the build in parallel mode, which is automatically going to parallelize multiple agents if it's possible to do that, and then start building it. So again, to trigger that, I've just pressed this little down arrow, and I'm going build in parallel. Okay, so now what's going to happen is we've got our plan, we've got some to-do lists, and it's going to start setting up multiple agents in the background that will start building this out for us. And you can see that it's created a sub agent. We'll look at those more in detail later. That's going to start building the app. So while this agent is building the app, let's talk about a few other features that we have. So first, let's just move this to the side so we can view the window in full. So you'll notice that right now we're in multitask mode. The reason we're in multitask mode is because we did run in parallel. And what we can actually do right now is that if I wanted to do something else, so I wanted to have another agent running while this one is building, I could just type a prompt right here. So I could start building another game. I could press a new agent and I could open up another project and start working on multiple at the same time. And that's kind of the benefit of this view, this agent view, where you can manage multiple agents in parallel. So I could go to my Python for beginners app here, and I could start chatting with this and doing this in parallel. Okay, so just want to make that known that you could switch between these windows, and that's kind of the point of this agent view that we're inside. Now, what I can do is I can remove this multitask mode, and when I'm just in this default mode here, all this means is that I'm just chatting with the agent normally. So I'm going to wait for one task to finish, then I'm going to run the next one, and we can queue up multiple tasks by typing, hello world or whatever the next task is that we want, and it will kind of go in an order where we wait for agent to finish, then it goes to the next task, next task, next task, sequentially. Now, there's some other modes. You're going to see we have the debug mode. Debug is when we want to fix a particular bug or problem. So we don't want the agent to build something new, but we want it to find what's wrong. So for example, the game's not loading. We flick it into debug mode. Hey, the game's not loading. Can you figure out the issue? Plan mode, we already covered that. That's what we start with at the beginning to generate a plan for our application. Multitask mode, we know what that is. And then ask mode is simply a mode that you can use if you want to ask questions about the code base, but you don't want Cursor to make any changes directly, okay? Additionally here, you have images. You can actually upload images directly to Cursor. So if there was some inspiration for an app you wanted, you can just copy an image and paste it right inside of here, and it can use that and view that. If the app's not working properly or you want to do a revision on something, you can take a photo of it, screenshot it, send it to Cursor, tell it to change that. And then we have skills and MCP servers, which we'll look at in a minute, as well as models. So I want to quickly talk about models, which you can also access from the model selector right here. So when it comes to selecting the models, you're going to notice there's a bunch of options. Now, first you have this max mode. The max mode refers to the size of the context window, and when you enable this, you will increase the context window size, which is going to use more usage and is only necessary when you have relatively large projects. So if you're building something simple like us, you don't need the max mode, you don't need to enable it because it is going to cost you more in terms of usage credits. However, if you're working in a really big code base, you definitely want to enable this, and it will expand how much context or information the model can reason on at once. Next, you have the auto mode, as we discussed. If you're not sure what to use, you can just flick it into here, and it will usually get the job done for you. And then other than that, you can pick the individual models that you want. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them. Again, my suggestion is that if you're doing something really simple that's typically web-based, use Composer 2.5. If you're doing something a little bit more complex, you can use this Grok model. This is the new model. It's very good. It's a little bit more expensive than Composer, but it's still very, very cheap relative to something like Fable or GPT 5.6 or all of the other models that you see here. Now, these other models like Fable 5, for example, or GPT 5.6, you can use them as well. Typically, I will only switch to those models if I'm not getting done what I need with the models built into Cursor. So maybe they've had 10 iterations and they can't fix a bug. okay, I'm going to switch over to Fable, and I'm just going to use it for something that's much more complex, get a fresh perspective, and see if this model can maybe handle it. Fable's not working. Okay, I'm going to switch over to GPT 5.6. So that's how I would use the models. I would keep default Composer 2.5 and Grok 4.5. Again, Composer if you want a little bit lighter usage, not as complex. Grok if you want something a bit more challenging. And then you just switch into these higher tier models when you need kind of a fresh perspective or something's broken. That's how I personally use them. Now, from these models, you can also edit them. Now, when you edit them, you can change the effort or the reasoning level. The higher effort you go, the slower they will be, but typically the better result you will get. You then have the option to enable fast mode. When you enable fast mode, it's going to make these models much faster in terms of the number of tokens or code that they're outputting, but it will use more of your usage faster. So it's up to you. I typically leave fast mode on, but again, if you're really constrained on cost or using the free version, for example, you probably want to turn that off. Okay, and same with all of these models, you'll see there's a bunch of options. You can change the reasoning, the context window, and in most cases, sticking with medium reasoning and the lower context window, especially if you're not building something complex, is totally fine. Okay, so while I explained all of that, the app has been built. Now you'll notice with Cursor that it's actually able to automatically run the application for you, and typically we can view that by looking in the Cursor browser. Now right now it hasn't actually put it in the browser for us, but sometimes it will actually load it up directly here. So if I want to view this app, but I don't want to go to my own web browser, usually when I press this button here, it will load it directly in this browser window that's built into Cursor. So again, the way I activated this is I just closed this, I pressed browser, you can see that it's here. I pressed on where the application is hosted, it says it's serving it right here, and boom, we have the app. Then from here, you can see I kind of get this forest platformer game. Okay, looks like I'm stuck and I can't get out, so, oh wait, there we go, okay. You know, we're going to have to make some changes here, or maybe I'm just really bad. Now we're going to have to adjust a few things because it's a bit too challenging for me to play. But you can see that we have the browser open. Now, as well as the browser on the right-hand side of our screen, you'll see changes, terminal, and then files. So if we open up terminal, we can run a terminal shell directly in here, so we don't need to leave this window. And then if we open up files or changes here, we can see any changes that have occurred. However, you're not going to see a lot of information here unless you have what's called a Git repository initialized. Git is a version control system. It's used by software developers to keep track of all of the changes in their project. Highly recommend that you enable it. It is a piece of software that you need to install, but if you want, you can simply just tell Cursor here, and let me change back to the model to do it for you. So I'm going to say, hey, can you please enable Git and just create everything? I don't understand how Git works, but I just want you to make a repo for me so that we can save all of the changes. So this is exactly what you can say. If you have no idea what Git is, just say, hey, make it. If it's not installed, it actually may be able to install it directly for you from the command line. And then these features on the side where you're viewing the files and the changes should start working a little bit better. Okay, now it made this Git repo to also create a file called git ignore. Again, I'm not going to explain exactly what it is if you're not familiar with it, but you're going to notice that it's not really showing me any changes right now. The reason why is that the changes that were just made actually were already what's called committed to Git. So it's a little bit more challenging for me to kind of review them right now, but don't worry, we'll make some more. However, I will show you that if we go to the files view, we can press this little expand thing on the right-hand side to view all of our files, and we can now view the files that we have. So we can see we have these audio files, camera files, and I can directly modify the code right inside of here if I want to do that. In most cases, you probably will not touch the code, and if you are, you likely won't do it from this agent view. However, just showing you that if you want to see what the structure of your project looks like, you can do that directly from here, okay? So you can see we have all the code. I can even make a new file if I want to. I can make a new folder. I can refresh to see any new stuff that has popped up. Okay, so I knew that was a lot of stuff. What I want to do now is just add a follow-up prompt, have it build this out a little bit more and make it a little bit more playable. Then we'll look at some more features. So I'm just going to say, okay, this is pretty good. However, it's very fast. It's a little bit difficult to jump. I find that I'm not dying also when I fall through the holes. Can we tidy this up, clean it up a little bit, make it a little bit easier to play, and the double jump feature, and make it not so fast so that I can move a little bit slower and it feels a little bit more controlled. Okay, so I'm giving the prompt, going to go ahead and hit enter, and then we'll get the result. Okay, so we can see that it's made some changes now, and you'll see the changes will pop up in the bottom here, and if you press on them, you can actually view what's called the diff view. Now, the reason why we can now see this diff view is because we've enabled Git, and Git, again, is a version control software which will keep track of the changes that are being made by your agents or by you. So I can view all of the lines that were changed, I can view all of the files, right? And this is pretty helpful, especially if I'm doing some serious coding and I want to make sure that I don't mess up, for example, a production code base. So by pressing that review button, it will kind of bring you to this pane and you can look through everything. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind here is that these changes that you see have already been applied to the code, and they can be a little bit difficult to revert if you don't do it at this point. What I mean by that is that typically the best practice when you're working with Cursor is that you ask it to make small changes at a time. So maybe you start with a big one, you build out the project, and then you do small iterative changes. You review the changes by actually testing the application, making sure that it works, viewing it in the panel, and then if there's an issue, you can directly tell Cursor here to revert these changes. So I can say, hey, revert all of the changes you just made, this isn't working, right? And then it can remove them before you keep going. Or additionally, you can say, okay, all of this looks good. Can you make a commit to solidify this so that we have it saved? And then boom, it will make the commit and save that. And a commit is something in Git that will kind of checkpoint the current code. So it's worth understanding a super basic feature in Git called commit. Commit is effectively a checkpoint of your current code base. It's something you can go back to in the future if something were to break. So what you're going to want to do is whenever you get to a point where your app is working, it's stable, there's no issues, you can just simply tell the model, hey, make a commit, and now you've kind of saved that state and you can always get back to it in the future. Additionally, after you make the change, before you just go on to the next stuff, make sure that it works, because if you want to remove the changes that are made, it can be tricky if you don't do it one at a time. I hope that makes sense. So from us, what we're going to do now is go back to the browser, right? We can try to play our game. We can see that now the speed is much better. The double jump mechanics still doesn't seem to be working, and I'm kind of getting trapped at the bottom, but at least it's kind of polished things up and seems a little bit more playable. And maybe I am supposed to go down there. I don't know. Anyways, key idea is that this is functioning now, and we can kind of move on to the next step. So let's keep going here. Oh, and I can actually kill that and move into the next level. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, so now actually I want to talk about the browser. Now, Cursor can actually control this browser for you itself, especially if you're building like a web app as opposed to a game. It can press buttons, it can view what's going on here, and you can tell Cursor to do that, and it will have direct control over the browser. However, you also have some control here where you can view, for example, the console of the browser, which let me just close this now, is this button right here. You can press these three dots and take a screenshot. You can reload it, you can clear the history, and you can use this design mode, which is this right here that I'm clicking in, or you can press this design mode button in the bottom left-hand corner. So when I'm in this design mode, I can select elements on screen. Now, there's not that many right now because I'm kind of in a game and like all the elements are kind of combined together. But for example, I can select this game container, and then what I can do is I can actually circle something, right? Or I can do a line, or I can point an arrow to something, whatever, right? And then when I do that, I can directly tell Cursor what I want it to do. So for example, I can circle this and just describe the change that I want to be made. I'm going to say, I don't really like the color of these kind of orbs or balls. Can we change them to be something different, maybe like purple? Okay, and then directly here, I can press enter, and when we go into it, it's going to have a screenshot of directly what I selected in the browser, and then it's going to move and make the change, or it's going to apply the change. So this, of course, is more useful when you're working on more of like a user interface or actually like a website as opposed to a game, but you get the idea. Pretty useful if you want to directly point to something and not kind of have to describe it. And now let's refresh here. I also told it previously in a cut I wanted to change the background, so we can see we've kind of changed that. I'm going to bring it out of design mode now, and when we want to play, we can see now we get these kind of purple orbs. They look pretty cool when I actually, hit them or select them. Okay, and you get the idea. And I mean, look, the game is pretty impressive considering we built this in 2 prompts. Okay, so that is the browser. Now, just one last thing to mention here. There's also a shortcut you can use on your computer. So if you're in design mode and you hit Shift, so hold Shift on your keyboard, and then you select, you can kind of drag like a rectangular portion of the window, and then same thing, directly chat with it. And if you want to get out of that, you can just hit Escape. Anyways, that is the browser in design mode. Of course, there's a lot of other features, but something you should know, and obviously good when you're testing it directly in the Cursor browser. All right, so at this point, I hope that you have kind of a fundamental understanding of at least the basics of Cursor in terms of the UI, how to kind of move around, how to prompt, changing the models, viewing the changes, the browser. I know it's pretty overwhelming if it's your first time, but I want to now start going into the advanced features that make this that much more usable. Now, a lot of times at this point, I would move to start using the IDE, okay? So what I want to do is actually change to the IDE view, which for me is a lot more comfortable to work in, and start kind of explaining things. And keep in mind that you can use both of these at the same time. So you can use this agent window that we're in, or you can use the IDE view, which I'm going to pop up here. So again, to access the IDE, you can press IDE, and then from the IDE, you can press the agents window, and you can switch between them. Now I'm going to make this a lot larger. I'm doing that by pressing minus and plus. Now you're going to notice that this looks completely different than the agent view. However, it should be a familiar view if you've ever worked inside of any kind of editor. Now on the left-hand side, you'll see a tab. You can expand this or close it with this button right here that shows you the files. So a little bit easier, you can see the files that kind of pop up and they're taking up most of your screen. So it's kind of an inverted version of the agents view where we have like the code being the center of the focus, and then we have the, kind of agent, which is on the right-hand side of our screen here, secondary. Now from the agent, same thing, you can kind of expand it on the right-hand side. And when I expand it, you can see now it kind of looks like a minimal version of the agents tab where I have an agent that I can chat with. Same thing, I can change the mode, plan, debug, multitask, ask. Agent is just the default mode. I can change the model, and I have the exact same kind of settings, right, like I had in the other view. And then I can make a new agent, I can customize the agent. You get the idea. Okay, now if you want to close this, you can also toggle the agent view right here, and then you can go into settings and view all this kind of stuff. Okay, so from here, in the agent view, what we can do is we can start using some slash commands. Now, these are going to be useful for managing multiple agents and running in the cloud, which we're going to look at right now. Now, when you press slash, it's going to show you commands as well as skills. Not everything I have here will be in your version because I have my cursor set up in a particular way, but you'll notice that if you press slash, you can view a bunch of useful things that you can run. Same with the commands, you have like code review, work tree, explain, in cloud, multi-model review, and this is actually the one that I want to use right now. So in terms of running multiple agents, as you already know, we can run multiple agents in parallel. I can spin up an agent to work on a, you died screen or something, right, for this app. I can work on a leaderboard. I can do these in parallel at the same time, and I can do a multi-model review, which is going to allow me to review the code using multiple models and different agents at the same time. So for example, if I do this slash multi-model review, I can say review all of the code and see if there's any bugs or refactoring or changes that we should make. Okay, I'm just giving it a prompt, and then I can go ahead and press on enter. And what this will do is select multiple different models for me or prompt me to select them and start reviewing the code. So you can say, hey, which model should we actually run the review with? Reply with one or more of these exact ones. So I'm just going to say, use them all. Okay, and it's going to use all of these different models and start reviewing it. And this is super useful, especially if after you've made a big change, because you can get different agents to review the code of other agents. Again, kind of an advanced feature, and is going to involve using these parallel sub-agents, which should automatically be created for you. Now, what these models will actually do is they'll work in something called a work tree. Now, this is a little bit complicated to understand, but a work tree is effectively a clone of your project that the agents can make changes on without affecting the original code. So if the agent messes something up, if it changes something, if it's running a command, whatever, it's in kind of a safe cloned environment, and only once it's comfortable with that change will it apply it back to the main code base. This can allow you to have these multiple agents running at the same time, and then they can kind of come together and combine their changes onto the proper version. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry too much about it, but we're going to have these agents spinning up. Let's wait and see the reviews that we get. All right, so you can see it's spinning them all up right now, right? These are multiple agents running in parallel at the same time. I can now view them from the Subagents tab, and if I want to see what any agent is doing, I can open it, right? So I can just open it here, and you can see now that we've got multiple views. You're an adversarial code reviewer, did not edit files, right? You get the idea, and we can see what all of them are doing at the exact same time. And if we go back to the agent view and we go to our repositories, okay, you can see same thing. We can view exactly what we were just doing in the IDE view now from the agent view. And again, I can click into these and I can view all of my sub agents running. The reason this is called a sub agent is because it's branched off of the main agent where we did this multimodal review. If we had separate agents, these would be in separate conversation chains where I opened a new one right here, and they're not sharing the original context from the first conversation, because each conversation is kind of its own view of the world. And if I make a new conversation, I'm resetting the history of what I was doing, right? Where it's going to start fresh. It can still read all of the code and work in the project, but it doesn't know all of the previous stuff that we've gone over. And if you want to see how much stuff is in your conversation history or in your context, there's a little circle here and it will show you. So it shows you your system prompt, tool definition, rules, skills, the conversation, and you can view how large this is getting. And generally speaking, once you start getting to 70, 80, 90% of the context, it's a good idea to either compact this context, which this will do automatically for you, which essentially summarizes what's currently happened, or move into a fresh session or conversation chain so that you don't, lose out on kind of the accuracy and the performance of the model. Because typically the model will perform worse once it starts getting close to the end of its context window. Okay, so anyways, it's reviewing all of this stuff. You can see one of the reviews is done here from Grok. If we look at Composer 2.5, it's still going. Opus is still going. I'm just going to close those for now, and let's wait for these to finish. Okay, so we can see that it has finished the review here. It has actions that it wants to do, right? And it's gone through and kind of combined all of these different results into one final summary that we got. So I'm just going to say, okay, go ahead and fix all of this. And while it's fixing all of that, we can move on and talk about the next features. So what I want to do now is talk about working in the cloud. Now, what we'll do is we'll make a new agent. We're in the same project, because when I make a new agent by default, it will be in the project where I've created the agent here. And I want to show you how we can connect up our project to the Cursor cloud so that we can actually trigger tasks to run not on our computer. Now, the basic idea behind the cloud is that right now we've run everything on our own machine. So that means that if I close my laptop lid, or I close this application, or it crashes, or it's running for a super long time and my laptop dies, runs out of battery or whatever, well, that task won't complete. So if that's going to be a concern for you and you can't run it locally, you can push this out to run on Cursor's compute in the cloud. It also means you can then trigger and manage everything from, for example, their iOS application and view what the agent is doing, like from different devices. So in order to do that, we need to connect the current project that we're working on to Git. And specifically, we need to connect it to a Git provider, something like GitHub, so that the repository is actually published online, and then Cursor can start working on it. Now, there's multiple ways to do this, but the easiest is just to ask the agent to help you. So I'm going to say, hey, can you please help me connect this repo to a remote GitHub repo so that I can start running cloud agents? Okay, so if you don't know what to do, just ask the model. It will be able to instruct it to you. And now what I'm going to do is just put it in ask mode so that it can just give me the instructions on what I need to do to run this. Now, I know obviously how to do this, but I'm just trying to show you, in case you're a beginner, how you would kind of get the insight. So it's going to start looking through this stuff and seeing how we can connect it. And it gives us the info here. So it says create a GitHub repo. This is a command that we can use, or we can add an origin. Okay, and we get the idea. However, I know that in order for this to work, we are going to need to have a GitHub account. So if you've not already, go to GitHub and make a free account. Most of you probably will have this. And actually a super easy way to make the repo and get this connected to the cloud is just to make a new repo from the Git website. So what I'm going to do is just make a repo and call this Cursor demo. For the visibility, I'll just go with public. I don't care if you guys view it, but if you want it private, go ahead. And then what I can do is just copy all these commands here. Actually, I'll just copy this, push an existing one, and I'm just going to paste it right into the agent and say, this is what I got from GitHub. Can you connect it for me? Okay, so the laziest way possible. But again, what we're doing is we just went make a new repo. It gave us kind of some setup steps. We don't got to worry too much about this. We just go, hey, connect it for me, and it should do that. Okay, so it says that it's done this. It also tells us we have some uncommitted local changes, and they're only on our machine until we commit and push. So let's go, okay, just upload all of these changes for me to GitHub. So I'm just reading through this to make sure that we've got everything done. And then once this is done, we should be able to connect this to the cloud, and I can show you how we can get tasks to run in the cloud versus running here. So let's go back to the other agent and make sure that it's finished. Okay, it looks like it made all of the changes for us. All right, and then what I could even do is say, hey, can you run the application for me? I just want to test it and make sure it's working. And then it should be able to run that for me as well. And we can switch between these agents. Says, okay, it's all pushed up here in GitHub, and we're going to wait for this to run. We're just going to view it, and then we will trigger a cloud task. Okay, so you can see this actually opened up the browser for me. Same as before, you can see I can select elements, kind of the same thing as the design mode. And now I can press enter and I can start playing this. I can double jump. Okay, it feels a little bit slower than before, but I think it's still pretty good. Okay, so I've just stopped this. I just wanted to make sure it was working, so we're all good. And what I'm going to do is make a new agent now, and I'm going to start running some commands that can trigger some stuff in the cloud. So you'll see that when we look at the commands here, we have a bunch of them that we can use, and one is /in-cloud. Now, if I run this, I can effectively just tell it something that I want it to do in the cloud, and it will just do that. So I'm going to say, can you do a full review of this game? Can you make it a little bit faster to play? Can we add some more enemies? Can we make it look a little bit less pixelated and make it look a little bit more modern? And then verify that everything's working. Whatever, right? Some tasks that I want this to perform, and then go ahead and press on enter. Because I'm using /in-cloud, it should push it to the cursor cloud. Let's give it a second. Now, right away, it's told us that it actually couldn't start this sub agent because it says there's no Git remote linked for this workspace, and the cloud runner needs exactly one. So what we've done is we've pushed this to GitHub, which is perfect. But what we now need to do is we need to link this repo in the cursor.com dashboard. So what I'm going to do is just press that to open it up because it's telling me exactly what I need to do here, and I can add this repo. So you can see that it says I need to connect to GitHub or GitLab here in my cursor account. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. For GitHub, we'll press this one because that's the provider that I want to use, and I will simply just authorize this. Okay, so now that I've connected to GitHub, the next step is that I need to actually link my repository. Now to do that, I can just go to where it says new agent, and I can go add repositories like this, and this is going to bring me to GitHub where I can now select the repos that I actually want to allow. So what I'm going to do is just allow all the repositories from my personal account. So I'll just install that and auth with GitHub Mobile, and you'll need to do the same thing if you want the cloud agents to work. Okay, so now that we've authed the GitHub repos, we should see a long list here when we look at them. And what we can do is go back to the settings. Sorry, I know there's a lot of steps here. We just have to enable the cloud agents, and we can go overview, and we should see this setup cloud for faster parallelized agents that verify their work. So I'm going to go setup. And what I need to do now is create a new environment using the repo that I want. So the one that I have is called cursor demo. So I'm just going to select that and press on continue. And what I can now do is start a cloud agent with this particular repo. And we should be good to go. It just needs to create an environment for us. Now, once the environment is created, then I can trigger this directly from the cursor app that I have, and it should run it in the cloud, but we need to start it from the cloud environment itself. I think there's multiple ways to do this, but at least for me, this is what works. Now, it's going to take a little bit of time to set up the environment, so I'm not going to run through the whole thing with you, but that should be enough to set it up for you. And then what you can do again is run the /in-cloud commands, and then you can have it triggered directly here. Once the cloud is enabled, there's a bunch of other stuff you can do with the cloud directly from Cursor. It kind of goes beyond the scope of this tutorial, so I'm not going to dive into it too much, but I just wanted to show you how to enable it, and then you can start pushing tasks out there and manage them from the mobile app and all of the new features and whatnot that they have. Okay, so now that we've gone over that, I want to have a look at some features that you can use directly when you're actually editing the code. So once the project gets a lot larger, especially if you're actually a dev, you want to make smaller incremental changes, and you may not actually want to do large multi-file refactors or huge changes like we were making. Now, in order to do that, if you want to just make a small targeted or precise change, you can select a block of code here, and you'll notice that it's going to give you two options. One is to add to chat, which allows you to actually directly reference that block. Or the other one that I use all the time is to quickly edit it, which also you can trigger with Control-K. So if you do that, what you can do here is just ask it a question or quickly edit this by just giving it some prompts. So I can say, refactor this so that the orb is much larger. Whatever, right? And then I can press enter, and it will just generate directly on this block of code, and boom, give you a larger change. That you can just undo it right here. Now you're also going to notice in this IDE mode that it's a lot easier to reverse changes. For example, maybe I'm going to ask it something like this. Go into @player.js and change the player entirely so it's larger and can jump higher. Whatever, okay? And you're going to notice also, by the way, I just want to show you this, that I can directly tag files in Cursor using the @ symbol. When I do that, I can reference documentation, files, past chats, the browser, different files, and you'll notice that I actually did that using Wispr Flow. Because Wispr is directly integrated in Cursor, I can just say something like @levels.js. And when I say that, it actually knows how to tag it, and it's kind of cool that it directly tags it inside of here. There's a few other ones like that. But anyways, if I do this, I just want to show you kind of the change flow here in the IDE view because it's a little bit different. You'll notice that now it's going to go directly in here. It's going to make a change. And this time when it makes a change, it's going to be a lot easier for us to review it and revert it back. So you can see that it's showing us the changes. I can kind of scroll through them here. And there's actually this keep file and this undo file. Now, keep file effectively doesn't really do anything because the file's already kept by default, like the changes have already been made. But if you want to revert the change now, and you can go between them, you can press undo file, or you can undo all of the changes by pressing this little button right here. So for me, when I'm making larger changes or when I am doing something that's supposed to be a little more precise or with code that I really care about, I work in the IDE view again because this for me is a little bit easier in terms of actually reviewing the code and making sure that everything is good. And then you can add this to chat, you can comment on it, or you can just undo everything and it will get rid of all of that very easily so that those changes will be reverted. Additionally, if you do actually want to write code, I don't know who's doing this anymore, but let's say I want to do something, there is a tab autocomplete. So if I start typing, so again, just kind of showing you here, you can see that I can press tab and then it will just autofill if you want to do that. I don't know if you guys are writing code in the editor, which I think many people are not doing anymore. Okay, so I just made a fresh agent, and I now want to talk about things like skills, commands, rules, and some more advanced features when you're creating a more serious project. Now, Cursor and many other agents have the abilities to create something called project rules. Now, these are essentially rules, right, or text that's going to be injected in the agent anytime you start working with it in this particular project. So, for example, you may want to have a rule that says, hey, I only want you to use JavaScript. I don't want you to use TypeScript. I want you to write everything or have every file be less than 200 lines of code. Or I want you to never do XYZ, whatever. Things that you don't want to have to keep repeating to the agent and that you want it to remember. If that's the case, you can put it in a rule. So to create a rule, it's actually easier just to ask the agent to do it. You could say, hey, can you please create a simple rule for me? I want this rule to state that we should always use JavaScript as opposed to using TypeScript or any advanced frameworks. And I want you to make sure that all of the files that you create are no more than 300 lines of code and everything is modular and factored very well. Okay? So there we go. We're going to go ahead and press on enter. And you're going to see in a second that it will create a new folder called .cursor. Inside of that, it will then create these rules, and these rules are things that will be automatically injected into the prompt anytime you write code. So you can see we have these rules that get created in this markdown file with this description and kind of always apply thing. And there is other ways to make rules, but it's always easier just to ask the agent and it will put it in here. Now, as well as rules, you have skills. Now, skills are essentially reusable workflows. You've probably seen them in other tools before that allow you just to kind of create a doc or a spec for how something should be done. Now, there's skills that are built into Cursor. You can see we have skills like automate, right? If we keep going, banner design, brand, browser automation, canvas. I don't know how many of these I installed versus which ones were automatically here, like create rule, right, which I use just to make a rule, create subagent, design, whatever. But you can use these, and when you use them, they will reference the skill file, which looks something like this. I just pressed on it so you can see this is what the skill file is. Now, if you want to make your own skills, you can do that, and then that will give you a command that you can run to run them repeatedly. So for example, I'm going to say, can you make a project level skill that just does a quick review and ensures that the game is playable at the correct speed? I just want this for a quick demo, so let's call it like speed skill, where I just want to make sure the player has the correct speed. I don't know, this makes no sense for a skill, but I'm just showing you if you want to make a new skill, you can just say, hey, make a new one. And I just want to show you kind of what it looks like here because it will use a skill, funny enough. To make the skill, it should put it in a new folder for us here inside of .cursor, and then we're going to be able to execute it. So you can see if we go here, we now have a skill, speed skill. It's created this for us. I can keep it, and then if I want to use this now, I can type /speed skill. You can see that's my custom skill, and I can run it, and then it's going to go and execute what we have in here for checking the speed of the player, and it says, boom, everything is good. We can continue. Now, all of this stuff you can also view and manage from the agents window. So if you go to the agents window, not that, where's the agents window? And you go to customize, you can see plugins, MCPs, skills, right? So all the skills that we have for user ones, subagents, rules, commands, hooks, and all of this other stuff that you can manage. And this is now where I want to start talking about plugins and MCPs. So what are plugins and MCPs? These are essentially additional functionality that you can add directly inside of Cursor. Now you can see that I've actually added a GitHub MCP server, I have a browser MCP server, and then in terms of plugins, I have this browser-based one as well as Zapier. Now, if there's a particular plugin you want, you can browse the plugin marketplace here. For example, maybe you want to connect to Slack or you want to connect to Figma. You can just do that. And then what will happen is it will give you a bunch of skills that you can use in Cursor. I'm not really going to go through them because it's really dependent on your workflow. And then same thing with MCPs. If you've seen an MCP server that you want to add, you can just add it and it should give you the config or the instructions from where you're adding it. If you want a good one to add, I would recommend adding the GitHub MCP server so that you can just tell it to directly do commands on GitHub and it will do that for you. Just nice now it's kind of put this all in one place. And again, if you want to manage this as well from the IDE, because I'm just showing you both of the views, you can go to the settings in the IDE, and from here, let's make this a little bit larger, you have all the same options. You have like Gits, plugins, rules, skills, tools, and MCP. So it's available in many, many different places that you can check out. All right, sorry for the cut here, but there's a feature that I wanted to bring in here that I forgot to mention to you, which is called Sidechats. Now, Sidechats is a new feature inside of Cursor, which is super cool, which allows you to select something in the current conversation and add it to a side chat. Now, when you add it to a side chat, this will allow you to have multiple agents running at the same time, but to reference something that was in the original chat and maybe ask a question about it or clarify it without interrupting the current agent. So for example, if in this agent I said, can you just make some minor changes to the game? Let's change the background color. Let's have like kind of a better main menu that also does a character selector. I'm just doing a random change, right? So I'm going to ask it to do that. And then while this is kind of chatting, let's say it pops something up that I want to ask a question about, or I want to go back and be, wait, what does that make? What is this? You know, I want to make a change here, whatever, right? I can just select something. So I'm going to select this and add it to a side chat. And now I can say, what is the best size for the character? What do you think? And I can chat on the side, right, while the main agent is running. And it's kind of the same thing as Subagents, but I'm able to reference parts of the original conversation. Super cool feature, relatively new. Just wanted to jump here and show it to you. Now let's go back to the rest of the flow. Okay, now I think the last major thing to go over quickly is automations. Again, something that I'm not really going to dive into too much, but that you can do using tools like Slack, for example, GitHub, Linear, whatever. All these different tools that you can connect effectively. And what you can do is make an automation so that agents will be automatically run either based on a schedule. So for example, once a day or once an hour, or based on the trigger of a particular event. So for example, I can go new automation. I can say, okay, the trigger for this automation is a Slack message or a GitHub message or a Sentry issue or whatever. And then I can say, hey, I want you to do this whenever this gets triggered. You can set up memories, you can add tools. Again, this could be a whole video on its own. There's so much to go over here, but I'm just showing you this exists, pretty new feature, and it's something useful, again, if you're working on real legitimate code bases and you want something to run quite frequently. Okay, so with that said, guys, that's gonna wrap up this video. I promised you a full course. I promised you a lot of features. I know there was a ton of stuff that we went over here, but I wanted to try to be as detailed as possible. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.